I would first like to highlight what is the quantum measurement problem. And there have been a lot of discussions about understanding it in terms of consciousness. So the Wheeler-Wigner kind of interpretation. There is also the other extreme which talks about only decoherence, and I also had mentioned about it, but there has to be a little bit of a qualification there, which I would like to present. And the idea that we go from a probabilistic aspect of reality towards a more deterministic one, of course, holds true. Right? There is a probability that precipitates to a deterministic state. But the way to interpret it has many different interpretations as such. So the Copenhagen interpretation, of course, talks about the probabilistic collapse. The many worlds interpretation would talk about the worlds themselves diverging and us being in one of them, or in certain specific one. And quantum Bayesianism, Bayesian philosophy or interpretation, talks about the degree of belief of the observer. Right? It's making it even more subjective in that sense. Now, there are people who have talked about decoherence as the preeminent theory. Decoherence means that the system and the environment get correlated with respect to each other. And in that correlation, you have basically the classicality aspect that comes about. Now, people say that that means that there is no subjectivity left. Right? Everything is kind of just because of the correlations. But then what we have still not found an answer for is that why go for certain specific states? Right, so the correlation part is understandable. Even the way the macroscopic environment and the system kind of gets correlated and all that, but the specificity of which one will actually be taken. Either we say that it's completely random and stochastic. There's no element of any design or whatsoever. But if you want some understanding of it, which state will be preferred, which state is going to be seen in the experiment, there is no answer to that still. Okay, which state problem still remains. Now, there are people who have taken this even further. Okay, and so this idea of observer dependence, essentially, now we talk about something known as quantum reference frames. Okay, very interesting. So reference frames we spoke about in the context of relativity, and I think optics, and when we're talking about mechanics and so on. So reference frames means the frame that you are situated in, and depending on which frame you are in, your movement or the length measured or the time measured, that differs.
Convenient for problem solving.
Many ways, but it's actually seen. I mean, Einstein did. I mean, it's not only about problem solving, but actually nature does see that. I mean, we see the problem of clocks not showing the same time, or the time that we traverse when we are moving and not moving. Obviously not in day-to-day life, but if you were to go in a space shuttle, for instance, that twin paradox aspect of things and so on and so forth. So this has actually been seen, I mean, in that experimental sense. So this is talking about quantum reference frames, okay, which basically means that there is a gentleman by the name of John Glowacki and a few others, and they have been saying that the way the systems transform and the way the properties come about of quantum states depends on a reference frame, right? So if I, for instance, am in some reference frame in the quantum context, right, and this is more of an abstract reference space, like it's a space, essentially mathematical space. If a system, let's say, is entangled in one of the reference frames, it may just happen that it may not be entangled in a different one. Okay, it's kind of like, for instance, in the reference frame idea in the relativity context, we say that, we give an observation about something, let's say, and somebody in a different frame will give a very different observation altogether, right? Similarly, in the quantum reference frame idea, the idea is that dependent on the reference frame that we are in, the characteristics, either entanglement or superposition or contextuality, that all is dependent on which reference frame we are talking from.
One short question.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Is it possible to, having the observer and the observed in the same reference frame?
Observer and the observed
is fundamentally not possible.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about reference frames, the frame is not the observer or the observed, right? It's more, you can think about it more in terms of mathematical structures, right? So quantum systems stay in mathematical structures called as Hilbert-spaces, right? So in the Hilbert-space perspective, there is something known as a group and a groupoid. Right? And I think I've been briefly touched upon the idea of groups. Now, in the groupoid perspective, there are certain kinds of symmetries that exist, which is a little more than in the case of a normal kind of group aspect. And the Hilbert space, the mathematical structure, is the frame. That is kind of characterizing the frame of sorts, right? So the idea of the fixed global Hilbert space, right? Just like in Einstein's times, we said that there is no absolute space and time, right? Is Brahmand mein ek ghari nahi hai, right? Every frame has different clocks, essentially. Similarly, in the quantum context, we can say there is no global Hilbert space. There is a context-dependent and frame-dependent perspective on quantum physics.
So obviously,
right? Obviously there will be certain differences, essentially, right? So the idea of observer dependence has been taken even further now, right, by Jan Glowacki and various others in that sense, right? Now, in the context of Advait Vedanta, when we say the drishta and the drishya, the seer and the seen, there is a very famous kind of aspect of it, which is drik drishya viveka, right? So viveka means discrimination. Discrimination in the right sense, not discrimination in the sense of social discrimination. Discrimination in the sense of spiritual discrimination or conceptual discrimination of that which is correct, or you could say the substratum at its most fundamental, and that which is not. Right, that which is more kind of emergent in that sense. So Drik Drishya Viveka talks about the various layers of nuance that comes in, and how do you discern what is true and what is not, essentially, right? So in Advaita, there are basically this aspect of Sakshi, right? The witness consciousness, essentially, and the idea of experiences, the Anvaya, right? That has a very big role to play. That is a very, very fundamental aspect of things, and this remains invariant, right, or largely unaffected by different kinds of fluctuations. Okay, different kind of we call it Vyatireka, which is different kinds of fluctuations. And so the idea is that that level of reality we're talking about. So in the Mandukya Upanishad, in the verse 7, we talk about something known as Turiya, right? Turiya is the fourth state, right? Now, what are the first three states? Waking, dream, and deep sleep state. Okay. Waking, dream, and deep sleep state. The fourth is Turiya, which is mentioned in Mandukya Upanishad, verse 7. Right? Now, the idea is that is something even beyond deep sleep. Okay, and that state is the state of our fundamental reality. So when you go through the Mandukya Upanishad, they give the various characteristics of these states very, very beautifully, right? So we are talking about that stage or state where again the binaries don't exist, right? There is no element of absolutism again which exists, right? There are many characteristics which are highlighted in the Turiya aspect of things as such. And again, Anirvachanyata is something that is highlighted.